The blizzard had already claimed 3 wagons by the time Clara Warren realized her husband was not coming back. She sat in the snow beside their overturned supply cart, one hand pressed against her swollen belly where their child grew, the other clutching a thin blanket that did nothing against the Wyoming winter of 1882. Thomas had said he was going for help after the wheel broke, had kissed her forehead with lips that felt like lies, and disappeared into the white curtain of falling snow. That had been 6 hours ago, and Clara knew in her bones what her heart refused to accept. Her fingers had gone numb an hour past, and she could no longer feel her feet in their worn leather boots. The baby kicked weakly inside her, as if it too understood the desperate situation they faced. She was 7 months along, far enough that the child might survive if it came early, but not here, not like this. Abandoned on the trail between Sheridan and Buffalo with nothing but frozen earth and her husband's betrayal for company. Clara pulled the blanket tighter and tried to remember warmth. She thought of her mother's kitchen in Philadelphia, of bread baking and tea steaming, of a life she had left behind to follow Thomas West, with promises of land and prosperity ringing in her ears. Those promises lay as dead as she would be soon if the cold continued its patient work. She could feel it pulling at her consciousness, whispering that sleep would be easier than fighting, that closing her eyes would hurt less than staying awake. She was drifting, letting the snow pile against her shoulders like a burial shroud, when she heard the horse. At first she thought it was a dream, or perhaps death coming in a form her mind could comprehend. But then the sound came again, hoofbeats muffled by snow but unmistakably real, and a voice calling out through the storm. "Hello, anyone out here?" Clara tried to respond, but her throat was too frozen, her lips too stiff. She managed only a weak sound, something between a gasp and a sob, but it was enough. The horse came closer, massive and dark against the white landscape, and then there was a man dismounting, running toward her with urgency in every movement. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" Clara forced her eyes to focus on him. He was young, maybe 25 to her 22 years, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by melting snow and eyes the color of summer sky. Even through her haze of cold, she could see the concern written across his weathered face, the kind of face that belonged to someone who worked hard under the sun. "My husband," she managed to whisper. "He left." The cowboy's jaw tightened, something like anger flashing across his features before concern took over again. How long ago? 6 hours. Maybe more. He cursed under his breath and began wrapping his own heavy coat around her shoulders. It smelled like leather and wood smoke and carried his body heat, and Clara nearly wept at the sudden warmth. "I am going to get you on my horse," he said, his voice steady and calm despite the situation. "Buffalo is only 3 miles south. Can you hold on that long?" "The baby," Clara gasped. His eyes dropped to her belly and his face went pale. "You are with child. 7 months." For a moment she saw something like fear cross his features, but then his jaw set with determination. "Then we need to move fast. My name is Franklin Rivers. I run cattle between here and Buffalo, and I promise you, madam, you are both safe now." Those words, spoken with such certainty in the midst of the storm, broke something inside Clara. She began to cry, tears freezing on her cheeks as Franklin lifted her with surprising gentleness. He was strong, she realized, the kind of strong that came from years of hard work rather than just natural build. He settled her on his horse, a large bay gelding that stood patient in the snow, and then swung up behind her. "Hold onto the saddle horn," he instructed, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her secure. "I have got you. Just stay awake for me." The ride to Buffalo passed in a blur of white and cold. Franklin kept talking to her the whole way, asking her questions to keep her conscious, telling her about the town they were heading toward, about his ranch just outside it. Clara learned that he was 24, that he had come west from Missouri 3 years ago, that he had been checking the northern trail for stranded travelers when he found her. She learned that his voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that made you believe everything would be all right even when the world was ending in snow and ice. "Almost there," he kept saying. "Just a little further. Stay with me." When they finally reached Buffalo, Clara was barely conscious. She had vague impressions of wooden buildings rising from the snow, of Franklin shouting for help, of being carried into warmth that hurt worse than the cold had. Then there were hands on her, women's voices, and Franklin's steady presence somewhere nearby saying, "Do not leave her. Please, do whatever you need to do." Dr. Samuel Morrison was a gruff man in his 50s who had seen his share of desperate cases in the Wyoming territory. He examined Clara with efficient hands while the preacher's wife, Margaret Hayes, helped remove her frozen clothing and wrapped her in warm blankets. Franklin stood just outside the examination room in the doctor's small house, refusing to leave despite being told he should go home and rest. "The baby?" he asked when Dr. Morrison emerged an hour later. "Still alive. Strong heartbeat. The mother is hypothermic, but she will recover with time and care. Another hour out there and I would be preparing a grave instead of a recovery room." The doctor studied Franklin with sharp eyes. "You saved 2 lives today, son." Franklin nodded, relief washing over his features. "Can I see her?" "She is sleeping. Might be out for a while as her body recovers. You should go home, get some rest yourself. You look half frozen." But Franklin did not go home. He settled into a chair in Dr. Morrison's front room and waited, still wearing his damp clothes, his coat long since given to Clara. Margaret brought him coffee and a blanket, studying him with the knowing eyes of a woman who had seen many things in her 60 years. "You do not even know her name," she observed. "Clara," Franklin said quietly. "She told me on the ride, Clara Warren. And you are going to sit here until she wakes up." "Yes, madam," Margaret smiled. "You are a good man, Franklin Rivers. Your mother raised you right." He thought of his mother, buried back in Missouri beside his father and 2 younger sisters, all claimed by fever the winter before he came west. "She tried her best," he said. Clara woke 2 days later to sunlight streaming through a window and the unfamiliar softness of a real bed. For a moment, she could not remember where she was or how she had gotten there, and then it all came rushing back. The cold, the abandonment, the cowboy with summer sky eyes who had promised she was safe. She sat up carefully, one hand instinctively going to her belly. The baby kicked strongly, and Clara released a breath she had not known she was holding. They had survived. They were alive. "You are awake." The voice came from the doorway, and Clara turned to see a plump woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled into a neat bun. "I am Margaret Hayes. My husband is the preacher here in Buffalo. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Clara admitted, "but alive. Thanks to Franklin Rivers. That boy has barely left this house since he brought you in. Dr. Morrison had to threaten him to get him to go home and change clothes." Margaret came into the room carrying a tray with soup and bread. "He has been by 3 times today already, asking after you." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "I need to thank him." "You will get your chance. He will be back within the hour, I would wager." Margaret set the tray on Clara's lap. "Now eat. You need strength, and so does that baby." The soup was venison and vegetables, rich and hot, and Clara ate it slowly, feeling life return to her body with each spoonful. As she ate, Margaret told her about Buffalo, a small but growing town with maybe 200 residents, about the cattle ranches that surrounded it, about the harsh but beautiful country they called home. "What about my husband?" Clara asked finally, the words bitter in her mouth. "Has anyone seen Thomas?" Margaret's expression hardened. "Franklin and some other men went looking for him once the storm cleared. They found tracks heading east, away from Buffalo. Looks like he took the 2 horses and left you with the broken wagon. They followed the trail for a day but lost it in the older snow. So it was true. Thomas had not gone for help. He had simply left her to die." Clara felt tears sting her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had cried enough for a man who did not deserve her grief. "Why?" she whispered. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and took Clara's hand. "Some men are not strong enough for this life. Some men run when things get hard. It is not your fault, child. Do you hear me? What he did says everything about him and nothing about you." Clara nodded, but the rejection still burned in her chest. She had loved Thomas once, or thought she had. Now she could not even picture his face without feeling disgust and anger. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and then Franklin Rivers was there, hat in his hands, looking uncertain in a way he had not looked certain in the storm. In the daylight, Clara could see him more clearly. He was taller than she had realized, maybe 6 feet, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His dark hair was neat now, combed back from his face, and he had shaved, revealing a strong jaw and a small scar on his chin. He was handsome in a rugged way and younger than Thomas by at least 5 years. "Madam," he said, nodding to her, "it is good to see you awake." "Thanks to you," Clara said, her voice stronger now. "Mr. Rivers, I owe you my life, both our lives." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But anyone did not. "You did." Clara met his eyes, those summer sky blue eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. "Thank you." Franklin's expression softened. "You are welcome." "How are you feeling?" "Better. Sore and tired, but alive. And the baby, strong. The doctor says everything looks good." Relief washed over his face, and Clara found herself wondering at this stranger who cared so much about the welfare of a woman and child he did not know. In her experience, men like Thomas looked after themselves first and worried about others only if it served them. But Franklin Rivers seemed cut from different cloth entirely. Over the next week, as Clara recovered her strength, Franklin became a regular visitor to Dr. Morrison's house. He brought her books to read, knowing she was bored confined to bed. He brought her news of the town and the surrounding ranches. He brought her wildflowers when the weather cleared enough for them to show through the snow, bright spots of color in the white landscape. They talked about everything and nothing. Clara learned that Franklin had come west after losing his family, seeking a fresh start in a land where the past did not weigh so heavy. He had worked as a ranch hand for 2 years before saving enough to buy his own small spread just north of Buffalo. 160 acres with good grazing and a creek that ran year-round. He ran 50 head of cattle and was slowly building his herd, doing the work himself with help from one hired hand during branding and roundup season. Franklin learned that Clara had been a schoolteacher in Philadelphia before marrying Thomas, that she loved books and learning, that she had come west believing in a dream that turned out to be a lie. She did not talk much about Thomas, and Franklin did not press her, but he could see the hurt in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. "What will you do?" he asked one afternoon as they sat in Dr. Morrison's front room. Clara was finally allowed out of bed, though the doctor still insisted she take things easy. "After the baby comes, I mean." Clara looked down at her hands, folded over her swollen belly. It was a question she had been avoiding, not wanting to face the reality of her situation. She was a woman alone in the Wyoming territory, pregnant and abandoned with no money and no family. Her prospects were grim at best. "I do not know," she admitted. "I can work once the baby is old enough, maybe take in sewing or washing, perhaps teach if the town needs a school teacher." "Buffalo is getting big enough that folks have been talking about hiring a teacher," Franklin said. "Most of the children here do not have much in the way of education. You would be doing good work. If they would hire a woman with an illegitimate child." Franklin's jaw tightened. "Your child is not illegitimate. You were married when you conceived. The fact that your husband is a coward does not change that." The fierce defense in his voice surprised Clara. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was care, yes, but something more than that, something deeper and more complicated. "You have been very kind to me," she said softly. "I do not understand why." Franklin was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "When I found you in that snow, so close to death, something in me just knew I could not let you go. Could not let either of you go. I know it sounds foolish, we were strangers, but standing there in that storm, wrapping my coat around you, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." He met her eyes. "I am not very good with words, Clara. I am better with actions. But I want you to know that you are not alone here. Whatever you need, wherever you need to go, I will help you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the bitter tears she had cried over Thomas. These were warm and real, born of gratitude and something else she was not quite ready to name. "You barely know me. Then let me get to know you. Let me be your friend at least." She smiled, the first real smile she had managed since the storm. "I would like that." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Clara and Franklin's friendship deepened into something neither of them had expected. He visited her every day, and when Dr. Morrison finally cleared her to leave the house, Franklin was the one who walked with her through Buffalo's muddy streets, showing her the town that had become her unexpected home. Buffalo was rough around the edges but growing fast. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, and the small church where Reverend Hayes preached every Sunday. There were houses scattered around the central area, some neat and painted, others little more than rough cabins. Beyond the town, the Wyoming landscape stretched vast and beautiful, all rolling hills and distant mountains with names Clara was still learning. Franklin introduced her to everyone they met. John Davis, who ran the general store. Samuel Chen, who worked as a cook at the hotel and was one of the few Chinese immigrants in the area. Martha Wilson, who ran a boarding house for single men working the ranches. Everyone treated Clara with kindness, and if they judged her for being a woman alone and pregnant, they kept it to themselves. The town council met in early April and agreed to hire Clara as Buffalo's first official schoolteacher, starting after her baby was born. Reverend Hayes had championed her cause, along with Franklin, who had spoken passionately about the need for education on the frontier. The salary was modest but enough to live on, and it came with a small house near the church that served as both the school and teachers' residence. "You did this," Clara said to Franklin as they stood outside the little house, looking at the fresh paint and repaired windows. The town council had fixed it up knowing she would need a place to raise her child. "You convinced them to hire me." "They needed convincing to see what was obvious," Franklin replied. "You are educated and smart and good with people. Buffalo is lucky to have you." Clara turned to face him, studying his honest face in the spring sunshine. Over the past months she had come to know this man, to appreciate his steady nature and quiet strength. He never pushed, never demanded anything from her, but he was always there, a constant presence she had come to depend on more than she wanted to admit. "Why do you do all this for me?" she asked, not for the first time. Franklin looked at her for a long moment, something complicated passing across his face. "Because you matter," he said simply. "You and that baby, you both matter." The baby came on a warm night in early May, arriving with surprising speed after a labor that lasted only 6 hours. Franklin paced in Dr. Morrison's front room the entire time, refusing to leave despite Margaret Hayes telling him he should go home. When the baby's first cry rang out, strong and healthy, he sank into a chair with his head in his hands, overcome with relief. "You can come in," Margaret said, appearing in the doorway with a smile. "She is asking for you." Franklin entered the room nervously, uncertain of his welcome in such an intimate moment. But Clara looked up at him with tired eyes and a radiant smile and held out her hand. "Come meet him," she said softly. Franklin approached the bed and looked down at the tiny bundle in Clara's arms. The baby was red-faced and perfect, with a downy covering of dark hair and fingers that curled into miniature fists. He was beautiful and terrifying all at once, this brand new life that had come so close to never existing. "A boy," Franklin said, his voice rough with emotion. "A healthy, strong boy." Clara looked down at her son with such love that Franklin felt his heart twist in his chest. "I am going to name him Matthew. It means gift of God, and that is what he is. A gift I did not deserve but received anyway." "May I?" Franklin asked, reaching out tentatively. Clara handed him the baby, and Franklin held Matthew with the careful attention of someone handling something infinitely precious. The baby squirmed in his arms, eyes shut tight, completely unaware of the storm he had survived in his mother's womb or the man who had saved them both. "Hello, Matthew," Franklin whispered. "Welcome to the world." Looking up, he found Clara watching him with an expression he could not quite read. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something softer and more dangerous, something that looked almost like love. Clara and Matthew moved into the teacher's house 3 weeks after the birth. Franklin and several other men from town helped carry her few possessions, clothes and books provided by the generous people of Buffalo who had rallied around the abandoned woman and her child. Franklin brought furniture from his ranch, a cradle he had built himself and a rocking chair that had belonged to his mother. "You have done too much," Clara protested as he set the chair by the window where she could rock Matthew and look out at the street. "I have not done enough," Franklin replied. They fell into a rhythm over that summer. Clara focused on being a mother, learning the countless small tasks that came with caring for an infant. Franklin visited daily, bringing supplies from the general store, helping with repairs around the house, holding Matthew so Clara could rest. The baby thrived under their combined care, growing fat and happy, laughing at Franklin's silly faces and reaching for him with chubby hands whenever he appeared. The town watched this developing relationship with interest and approval. It was clear to everyone, except perhaps Clara and Franklin themselves, that something deep was growing between them. The way Franklin looked at Clara when she nursed the baby, the way Clara's face lit up whenever he walked through the door, the way they moved around each other with easy familiarity that spoke of deep comfort and trust. "You should marry him," Margaret Hayes said bluntly one afternoon as she and Clara prepared lesson plans for the school year that would start in September. Matthew was napping in his cradle, and the two women sat at Clara's kitchen table, surrounded by books and slates. Clara's hand stilled on the primer she had been reading. "What, Franklin, you should marry him. That boy is desperately in love with you, and unless I am blind, you feel the same way about him." "I am still married to Thomas," Clara said quietly. "Thomas abandoned you to die." "There are legal remedies for that. ways to dissolve a marriage when one party has committed such a grievous wrong. Reverend Hayes has been researching it. Desertion is grounds for divorce in Wyoming territory. Clara felt her heart start to pound. She had not let herself think about Franklin in romantic terms, had told herself repeatedly that he was just being kind, that she was a project for him, a damsel he had rescued and now felt responsible for. But she could not deny the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, or how she found herself watching the road for his arrival each day, or how empty the house felt when he left each evening. "He has never said anything," she protested weakly, "because he is a gentleman. Because you were vulnerable and pregnant, and then recovering from childbirth. Because he does not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated." Margaret reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "But I have known that boy since he came to Buffalo 3 years ago. I have never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars." "What if I am not ready?" Clara whispered. "What if I choose wrong again? Franklin Rivers is nothing like Thomas Warren. Surely you can see that." Margaret squeezed her hand. "But take your time. That boy will wait as long as you need. He would wait forever if that was what you required." That evening, when Franklin came by with fresh vegetables from his garden, Clara found herself studying him with new eyes. He was wearing his work clothes, dusty from a day of ranching, but he had cleaned up before coming to her house, his face freshly washed and his hair still damp. He greeted her with his usual warm smile and asked about her day, before settling into the rocking chair to hold Matthew while Clara prepared dinner. This had become their routine, so natural and comfortable that Clara had not even questioned it. Franklin came each evening and stayed for dinner, helping with Matthew, talking with Clara about everything and nothing. He always left before full dark, mindful of propriety, but those hours together had become the best part of Clara's day. "Franklin," she said as they ate the simple meal she had prepared, "can I ask you something? Anything? Why have you never married? A man like you with property and prospects, you could have your pick of women." Franklin set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "I never found anyone I wanted to spend my life with. I was not interested in marrying just to have someone cook and clean for me. I wanted what my parents had, a real partnership built on respect and care. I wanted someone I could talk to at the end of a long day, someone who made me laugh, someone who made me want to be better than I was." He paused. "I was starting to think maybe that did not exist, or maybe I had missed my chance." "And now?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Franklin held her gaze, and in his eyes she saw everything he had never said aloud. "Now I think I was waiting for the right person, even if I did not know it at the time." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words and feelings. Clara felt her cheeks flush, felt her heart beating so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. Before she could respond, Matthew began to fuss in his cradle, and the moment broke. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be ignored. Over the next weeks, Clara found herself thinking constantly about what Margaret had said, about the possibility of a future with Franklin. She began to notice small things she had taken for granted. The way he always made sure she ate enough, the way he talked to Matthew as if the baby could understand him, the way his face softened when he looked at her. In late June, Reverend Hayes brought Clara papers for a legal divorce based on desertion. The process would take time, he explained, but it could be done. Thomas had broken their marriage contract in the most fundamental way, and Wyoming law recognized that. Clara signed the papers with a hand that barely shook. She felt no sadness, only a sense of closing a painful chapter. Thomas was her past, a mistake that had nearly cost her everything. But from that mistake had come Matthew, And from that storm had come Franklin, and Clara could not bring herself to regret a path that had led her here, to this life in Buffalo with these people who cared for her. She told Franklin that evening as they sat on her small porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Matthew was asleep inside, and the evening air was warm and sweet with the smell of prairie grass. "I filed for divorce today," she said quietly. Franklin turned to look at her, surprise and something else flickering across his face. "How do you feel about that?" Relieved. "Free, almost." Clara twisted her hands in her lap. "Margaret says it will take months to finalize, but Reverend Hayes thinks it should go through without problems since Thomas has not been seen or heard from since he left me." "That is good. You deserve to be free of him." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Clara gathered her courage. "Franklin, we need to talk about what is happening between us." She felt him tense beside her. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. This thing we have been dancing around for months, this feeling that grows stronger every day." Franklin stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was tight with controlled emotion. "I did not want to say anything. You have been through so much, and I did not want you to feel pressured or obligated because of everything I did to help you." Clara rose and moved to stand beside him. "What if I do not feel pressured? What if I feel something else entirely?" He turned to face her, and in the fading light his eyes were dark and intense. "What do you feel, Clara?" She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble under her palm, the warmth of his skin. "I feel like I am falling in love with you," she whispered. "I feel like somewhere between that storm and now, you became the most important person in my world besides Matthew. I feel like when you leave each night, you take all the light with you." Franklin closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I have been in love with you since I wrapped my coat around you in that snow," he said hoarsely. "I looked at you, so brave and strong even when you were dying, and something in my heart just said she is the one. I know it sounds crazy. I know it was too fast. But Clara, I have loved you every single day since then." "Then why did you not say anything?" "Because I wanted you to be sure. Because I needed you to choose me not out of gratitude or necessity, but because you truly wanted me." He cupped her face in his hands, gentle despite his obvious emotion. "I would have waited years, Clara. I would have waited forever." Clara smiled through her own tears. "You do not have to wait anymore." When Franklin kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, the kiss of a man who had been imagining this moment for months. Clara melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling safe and cherished and completely loved. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been, all heat and selfishness. This was different, deeper, a meeting of souls that had recognized each other in the midst of a blizzard. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "When your divorce comes through, marry me. Let me be a father to Matthew. Let me spend my life taking care of you both." "Yes," Clara said simply. "Yes to all of it." The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Clara and Franklin did not hide their relationship, and Buffalo approved heartily of the match. Everyone loved Franklin, respected him as a hard worker and honest man, and they had all taken Clara and Matthew to their hearts. The school teacher marrying the rancher seemed like the perfect ending to a story that had started so tragically. Franklin was careful about propriety, never staying too late at Clara's house, never giving the gossips anything to work with. But he was there every day, and his love for both Clara and Matthew was obvious to anyone who saw them together. He built Matthew toys and played with the baby for hours, making up silly songs and games that had Clara laughing until her sides hurt. He brought Clara books and wildflowers, fixed everything in her house that needed fixing, and listened with genuine interest when she talked about her plans for the school. In August, Clara began teaching, opening Buffalo's first official school to 15 students ranging from age 6 to 14. She loved the work, loved seeing young minds light up with understanding, loved the challenge of managing different ages and abilities in one small room. Franklin was proud of her, bragging to anyone who would listen about the brilliant schoolteacher who was going to be his wife. The divorce papers came through in October, a simple legal document that dissolved Clara's marriage to Thomas Warren on grounds of desertion and abandonment. Clara felt nothing but relief when Reverend Hayes handed her the decree. She was finally legally free. Franklin proposed properly that evening, getting down on one knee in Clara's small living room with Matthew watching from his blanket on the floor. He had a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother, and his hands shook as he held it out to her. "Clara Warren, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you let me love you and Matthew for the rest of my life? Would you build a future with me here in Wyoming on this land that brought us together?" Clara pulled him to his feet and kissed him soundly. Yes, Franklin Rivers. Yes to everything. They were married in late October in Buffalo's small church, with half the town in attendance. Clara wore a simple dress of pale blue that Martha Wilson had helped her sew, and Franklin wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and completely happy. Matthew, now 6 months old and fat with health, was passed around between guests who cooed over him. Reverend Hayes performed the ceremony with obvious pleasure, speaking of second chances and unexpected blessings, of how sometimes the darkest storms led to the brightest dawns. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed Clara like she was the most precious thing in the world, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the hotel, with food contributed by everyone in town and dancing that lasted into the night. Clara danced with Franklin until her feet hurt, laughing and breathless and more joyful than she had ever been. This was real, she kept thinking. This man loved her, truly loved her, and she loved him back with an intensity that still sometimes surprised her. They spent their wedding night at Franklin's ranch, which would now be their home. He had spent weeks preparing for her arrival, building an addition to his modest house to create a proper bedroom for them and a nursery for Matthew. Everything was clean and neat, and Clara could see the care he had put into making the space welcoming. "Welcome home," Franklin said as he carried her over the threshold, a tradition he insisted on despite Clara's laughter. Home. The word had never meant so much. Clara looked around at the sturdy house with its stone fireplace and simple furniture, at the crib where Matthew already slept peacefully, at the bed that would be theirs to share. This was home now, this ranch on the Wyoming prairie with this good man who had saved her life, and then given her a reason to live it. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, two people learning each other with care and patience. Franklin was gentle, always checking that Clara was all right, that she wanted what was happening. Clara marveled at his consideration, the way he put her pleasure and comfort above his own needs. This was what love should be, she realized. This partnership, this mutual care and respect and desire. Afterwards, lying in Franklin's arms with her head on his chest, Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. "What is wrong?" Franklin asked immediately, concern in his voice. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." Clara tilted her head to look at him. "I was just thinking about that storm, about how close I came to dying in the snow. And then I think about now, about you and Matthew and this life we are building, and I cannot believe this is real." Franklin tightened his arms around her. "It is real. You are safe. You are loved. You are home." "I love you," Clara whispered. "So much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret this," Clara said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Franklin Rivers." They built a life together over the following years, and it was everything Clara had dreamed of and more. Franklin was a devoted husband and father, working hard to make the ranch profitable while always making time for his family. Clara continued teaching, beloved by her students and their families, making a real difference in Buffalo's growing community. Matthew grew into a bright, curious toddler with his mother's dark hair and his father's summer sky eyes. He called Franklin Papa from the time he could talk, and Franklin's pride in being Matthew's father was obvious to everyone. He taught the boy to ride, to care for animals, to work with his hands. He read to him every night, the same books Clara had read to her students, creating a love of learning that made Clara's heart swell. In the spring of 1884, Clara gave birth to their first child together, a daughter they named Rose. Franklin cried when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed with gratitude for this life he had somehow been blessed with. Matthew, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her under Clara's watchful eye. 2 years later came another son, whom they named Jacob. Then in 1888 came twin girls, Emma and Alice, who kept the entire family running in circles trying to keep up with them. The ranch house grew with the family, Franklin adding rooms as needed, always building with his own hands and the help of neighbors who had become dear friends. The ranch prospered as well. Franklin's careful management and hard work paid off, and by 1890 he was running 300 head of cattle and had hired 3 full-time ranch hands to help with the work. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, their children growing up with full bellies and warm clothes and an abundance of love. Clara eventually stopped teaching to focus on raising their large family, but she never lost her love of learning. She taught all their children to read before they started school, made sure they understood the wider world beyond Wyoming's borders, encouraged them to dream big even while appreciating the simple beauty of the life they had. On a cold December evening in 1892, 10 years after that fateful blizzard, Clara and Franklin sat on their porch watching the snow fall. The children were all asleep inside, and the ranch was quiet and peaceful. Clara was wrapped in Franklin's arms, a blanket around them both, comfortable in the silence that came from years of knowing each other completely. "Do you ever think about that day?" Clara asked quietly. "The day you found me." "All the time," Franklin admitted. "Sometimes I wake up in the night and think, what if I had not been checking the trail that day? What if I had gone a different direction? What if I had missed you in the storm?" He shuddered. "I cannot imagine my life without you and Matthew, without all of this." "I think about it too. About Thomas, about how close I came to dying." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "But I do not have regrets anymore, Franklin, not even about Thomas. Because if I had not married him, if he had not brought me west and then abandoned me, I would never have met you. I would never have had this life." That is a generous way to think about it. It is the only way I can think about it. Otherwise the anger and bitterness would eat me alive. Clara touched his face, her fingers gentle. "You saved me that day in the snow, but you have saved me every day since then too. You showed me what real love looks like. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. You are the best man I have ever known, Franklin Rivers." Franklin kissed her softly. "You are my heart, Clara. You and our children, you are everything that matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow cover the Wyoming landscape in white, the same snow that had nearly killed Clara a decade ago. But now it was just beautiful, a reminder of how far they had come, of the warmth and love they had built together in this harsh and unforgiving land. Inside the house, Matthew stirred in his sleep, dreaming 12-year-old dreams. Rose murmured in the room she shared with Emma and Alice. Jacob snored softly in the boys' room. Their children, safe and warm and loved beyond measure. The family that had started with a desperate rescue in a blizzard and grown into something beautiful and lasting. "We should go inside," Clara said eventually, feeling the cold despite the blanket and Franklin's warmth. "It is getting late." But they sat a moment longer, neither wanting to break the spell of the quiet evening. They had worked so hard for this life, this peace, this love. It seemed important to appreciate it, to hold on to these perfect moments when everything was exactly as it should be. Finally, they rose and went inside, checking on each sleeping child before retiring to their own room. They made love slowly and tenderly, the passion of their wedding night now tempered with years of knowledge and deep affection. Afterwards, Clara fell asleep in Franklin's arms, feeling safe and cherished and completely content. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost Rose to influenza when she was 8, a grief that nearly broke them both. But they held each other through it, leaning on their love and their faith and the support of their community. They emerged from that darkness closer than ever, understanding how precious and fragile life could be. Matthew grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a girl from Sheridan and settling on his own ranch nearby. Jacob followed his mother's love of learning and went east to college, becoming a doctor and returning to practice in Buffalo. Emma married a rancher from Montana, and Alice surprised everyone by becoming a nurse and moving to Denver. Franklin and Clara grew old together on their Wyoming ranch, their hair turning gray, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. They sat on their porch in the evenings watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades, content in the life they had built. On a warm spring evening in 1920, when they were both in their 60s, Clara looked at Franklin and said, "I have been happy every single day since you found me in that snow. Did you know that?" Franklin smiled, his face lined now but his eyes still that same summer sky blue that had captivated her all those years ago. Even the hard days, because we faced them together." Clara took his hand, feeling the familiar roughness of his calloused palm against hers. "You are the great love of my life, Franklin Rivers. If I had 100 lifetimes, I would choose you in every single one." "And I would choose you," Franklin said, his voice thick with emotion. "From that first moment in the blizzard to this very second, I have never stopped thanking God that I found you. You are everything I ever wanted and so much more." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, two people who had found each other in the midst of death and created a life full of love. Their story had started with abandonment and despair, with a pregnant woman freezing in the snow and a cowboy who refused to let her die. But it had become so much more than that rescue, growing into a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of kindness and courage and the fierce determination to build something beautiful from the ruins of what came before. Clara thought about that terrified young woman she had been, sitting in the snow waiting to die, and wanted to reach back through time to tell her not to give up. To tell her that a man with summer sky eyes was coming, that he would wrap her in his coat and promise she was safe, and that promise would be just the beginning of a love that would last a lifetime. She had been so afraid that day, certain her story was ending. But really, she understood now, it had just been beginning. Everything she had endured, every moment of cold and fear and despair, had led her to this porch, this man, this life, and she would not change a single moment of it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Franklin squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" Clara smiled. "About how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best thing that ever happened to you. About how you never know when your whole world is about to change." "I knew," Franklin said softly. "The moment I saw you, something in me knew my life would never be the same." "You saved me," Clara whispered. "We saved each other," Franklin corrected. "You gave me purpose, a reason to be better than I was. You gave me a family and a home and a love I never thought I would find. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day." They sat together as the Wyoming night deepened around them. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had withstood everything time could throw at them. Their children grown and gone, but always coming back, drawn by the warmth and love that still filled their parents' home. Their grandchildren running through the same fields where Clara had once taught them to read. Their legacy written in land and family, and a love story that would be told for generations. And somewhere in the distance, snow began to fall, gentle and soft, a reminder of where it all began. But Clara was not afraid anymore. She had Franklin beside her, his hand warm in hers, and she knew that whatever came, they would face it together. Just as they always had. Just as they always would. That was the promise he had made her in the blizzard all those years ago. "You are both safe now." And he had spent the rest of his life making sure that promise held true, creating a safety that went beyond mere physical survival, a safety of the heart that came from being truly, deeply loved. It was more than Clara had ever dreamed of in those dark moments in the snow. It was everything she had never dared hope for. And it was real, solid, lasting, a testament to the power of one person's kindness, changing the course of two lives forever. As they finally rose to go inside, Clara looked back at the snowy landscape and whispered a thank you to the storm that had brought them together, to the blizzard that had nearly killed her, but instead had given her everything worth living for. Then she let Franklin lead her inside, into the warmth and light of the home they had built together, into the rest of their beautiful, hard-won, perfectly imperfect life.